this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. Our guest today is somebody who has written a book, who is very comfortable managing risk, and who has had an incredible career in the social work field. So we have a lot to talk about today. He and I have both been a part of a group locally of private practitioners. And so we try to meet once a month and discuss a lot of the challenges that come up for many of us in this navigating the clinical realm and the business realm. So Tom Butero, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. So you had written that you are mostly retired at this point. So fill the audience in on your career climb, how you spent your career as a social worker, and what your days look like now.
Oh boy, how far back do you want to go? I've been in the field in one form or another for over 50 years. My undergraduate degree was basically a bachelor's in social work from a little liberal arts school outside Chicago that doesn't even exist anymore, George Williams College, which is also where I got my master's degree in social work. George Williams was the founder of the YMCA, and the college started off originally as a training school for YMCA professionals, and then they expanded to other things. I've worked in nonprofits during my whole career, various kinds, but mostly child and family service type agencies, both in a direct practice capacity and later as my career progressed as a program director, supervisor, manager, and for a time I was executive director of a youth and family service agency in Newport, Rhode Island, actually Middletown. But all along, my interest has always been to study and research and trying to understand everything I could learn about the issues of suicide and suicide prevention. And the result of that is my book. It's backwards. The title is I Don't Want to Die, a new look at suicide assessment, intervention, and prevention. It's basically my approach to the whole issue. And so that's kind of where I am now, and I'm busy trying to promote the book in a lot of different ways and doing some other things on the side. So that's why I say I'm mostly retired, not entirely. I don't think I could ever go that route and not have something to do to keep myself busy. So
I can understand that completely. So let's start off with what you were experiencing in the clinical realm yourself or in supervising or being in a managerial position that informed this unique approach that you have to risk assessment and intervention that led you to write a book about it.
Well, it started actually when I was an undergrad. We had an on-campus drop-in center hotline. And part of the training that we went through was issues related to people in crisis, one of which was the whole issue of suicide and trying to understand the dynamics behind that. My first I guess you'd call it a job. It was actually a volunteer position at a mental health clinic, was with a crisis team at a mental health clinic in Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, a little town called Granite City, Illinois. And that's actually where the title of the book comes from. I was the on-call person one day, and I took a call from a gentleman who had taken a near-fatal overdose. And this is back in the mid-'70s, okay? So no cell phones, no computers, none of that. I literally had to stay on the phone with this gentleman until my teammates and the phone company could track down where he was. And twice during the phone call, he said those words to me. He said, "I don't want to die." And in fact, at one point, he shouted it. And he said, "My God, I don't want to die." And that's where the title of the book came from. My interest has always been throughout my career to try to understand it more. And I've kind of developed my own approach, my own thinking about the topic. And that was the genesis of the book, basically. And at some point, I just decided it was time for me to put what I know on paper. And that's what happened.
Well, I'm really glad that you did. So give us an overview of what your experience has led to in terms of this specific approach that might be different than most of us conceptualize this concept of suicidality.
Well, there's basically three things. And I don't know as they're so different as much as they are. And we called the subtitle a new look. It's actually, for me, I think of it more as a unique look at the whole issue. And there are basically three things. When I do risk assessment, or when I do, and I've done hundreds of trainings over the years of both professionals and lay audiences. When you do a risk assessment, looking at content is very important. And the content is looking for signs and symptoms of depression, family history, any history of suicide attempts in the past, and all those, what I refer to as content-related issues. Those are extremely important to get in terms of risk assessment. The other side of the coin, and this is what I talk about, that's a little bit unique, is also to look at process. In other words, what is the process that the person has gone through that led them to the point now where they are having some serious suicidal ideations? So I'll ask questions like, when did your suicidal ideation start? How long ago were you first experiencing these feelings? Another question is, are the feelings constant? Do you ruminate over them? Or are they intermittent? Do the feelings come and go? The more intermittent, the less risk. And again, this is a continuum, so there's no such thing as no risk. There's low, medium, and high. So I wanted that information. Another question that I like to ask, and this is crucial for me, is how does the person feel about those feelings? In other words, what's their response to their ideation? And I get different responses to that. And the typical ones are, for lack of another way of putting it, I'm comfortable with those feelings because suicide feels like it might be the answer for me. That's obviously somebody that's at high risk. The other response I sometimes get is those feelings frighten me. They scare me. I don't think that's something I would ever do, but I just can't shake the feeling. Okay. That's, again, lower risk than the other side.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I learned, and this was a result of actually my master's thesis, where we developed a program model for a suicide prevention center. And our research advisor put a question to us as to why is suicide prevention important? Why does it matter? And through reading and research and study and experience, I came to the conclusion of two important issues. One, suicidal feelings are temporary. They come and go. No one is suicidal all the time. Suicidal ideation is a combination of feelings and thoughts. And like any other collection of feelings and thoughts, you can't hold on to them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, my question about whether or not their ideation is constant or whether it's intermittent kind of speaks to that. That's important when I intervene, because knowing that the suicidal feelings are temporary, I will never say to somebody, don't kill yourself. What I will say is, don't do it now. Let's put it off. Let's agree to a time period where you promise not, and then we can get into contracting. That's a whole other issue. But let's come up with a time frame where you can agree to not make a suicide attempt. The premise being, the more time I can buy, the more apt those feelings are to dissipate. So that's one important issue. The other thing is the concept of ambivalence. Everyone who is suicidal, and even people that have made serious suicidal attempts, at some level are ambivalent about those feelings. There's the wish to live and the wish to die, both going on at the same time. And for the seriously suicidal individual, the wish to die may be way up here and the wish to live down there, but it's there. Okay. So again, my intervention at that point is, I make the assumption that the wish to live is present, even at very low levels. So I won't say to somebody, tell me about the part of you that doesn't want to die, because that kind of puts a negative connotation on it. What I will say is, tell me about the part of you that wants to live. And you would be amazed at the reaction. It's almost like, by my asking the question, you can almost physically see the person just kind of go, okay, I can talk about that part. Mm-hmm. And I try to tap into that as much as I can, understanding that their suicidal ideation is really taking precedence. But it's a way of trying to address the ambivalence and the fact that it's okay to have that feeling, and it's okay to feel like you want to die, but at the same time, maybe that part of you that wants to live, maybe we can work on that a little bit. So those are the three basic concepts that I think make my approach somewhat unique.
This has a high level of intensity, but it also is so helpful. And I see it being kind of on another level where all of us in the role of therapist need to be comfortable conducting a risk assessment. And then we all personally have our own level of comfort in addressing that.
Sure.
But I see this going beyond just that basic level of what we all have been taught to do, which is really getting a lot more of that information and context,
right.
But that this goes definitely a little bit deeper. And I can see this being really helpful to those that are newer in the field, but also those who are more seasoned, where these are not always things that are at the forefront of our mind to be asking,
right.
And especially if it's not the most comfortable conversation to be having with someone. Right. You might be so focused on, do I need to take immediate action? Does this person need to be sectioned? Do they need to go for an evaluation? As opposed to, if they're open to it, really scratching the surface and getting to the heart of what's really going on. So what advice would you have to someone that maybe isn't as comfortable having some of these conversations? It sounds like it's been very successful for you and the people that you've overseen. But for those that aren't really comfortable with it, what would be helpful for them to know to start delving a little bit deeper into these conversations?
Well, there's two things. And first of all, understand this doesn't work all the time. Okay, there's no model of suicide prevention that works all the time. If it did, we wouldn't have anyone killing themselves, as long as they were involved in a treatment setting. But there's two things. One is to be comfortable with the word. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was doing my first year internship, I was in a session with a young man who presented with depression and anxiety, and I had an inkling that there was some suicidal ideation going on. And I looked at him at one point and I said, hey, have you been having thoughts about doing something? And he kind of looked at me like, what? And I said, have you been thinking about you might do something? And again, he just didn't know. Finally, I said, have you been feeling suicidal? And it's like, Yes. So be comfortable with the word, be comfortable asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's the first thing. And
Mm-hmm.
if the person says no, don't just take that at face value. Do a little more digging. Um, the other thing is just make it a regular part of your assessment, whether it seems relevant or not. And I have often said to someone who presented with something maybe totally seemingly irrelevant to the subject matter, I just basically asked them, have you ever had, or are you having any feelings of suicide? Um, if they get a little bit indignant or anxious about it, I just basically say, this is a regular part of my assessment. I ask this of everyone, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the other side of the coin, and particularly with kids, because I used to do a lot of work with adolescents, uh, you'd be amazed at how many times I asked the question with the parents in the room. Kid says, yeah, last week I was up in my attic. I was ready to hang myself. And the parents are like, what? So if you don't ask the question, you're not going to get the answer. And it may or may not
Mm-hmm.
be the answer you're looking for, but you've got to ask the question. You've got to be comfortable with the word, and you've got to ask the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with this process of actually putting this in writing and, the process of this becoming a book. So tell us about kind of what was that moment when you made the decision to go in that direction, and anything you can share about that process that would be helpful to someone
Yeah.
that is intrigued by that idea.
Yeah. Well, you have to, first of all, have the motivation. And there's a certain, I don't want to call it narcissistic piece to it, but there's a certain ego, if you will, that says I know enough about whatever the subject is that I'm going to write about, that I feel confident enough to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what the impetus was. One of the last things I did in my previous job was a training for a group of outpatient clinicians. And as they were walking into the room, one of them asked me which model of suicide prevention I was going to be presenting. And I literally looked at her and paused for a moment, and I said, Tom's, meaning mine. And that's when I decided that I needed to put what I know on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned three things through this process, and it's not a simple process. I have to tell you. I mean, this was probably almost 3 years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
And you write and you edit and you write and you edit and you write and you edit and you keep making changes and additions and subtractions. And then you hand it off to an editor, a professional editor, and he makes more changes. Then you hand it off to a publisher who makes more changes. It's not just write it, send it, publish it. It's not that simple. But I've learned three things. One is write what you know, and this is what I know. The other is no matter how good you think it is, it can always be better. And I learned that through this process of editing. And the third rule, which kind of flies in the face of the second rule, is the point at which you got to say it's done and it's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the three things that I learned. But like I say, it's not as simple as it sounds. It's not like, okay, sit in front of your keyboard or whatever, pound it out, send it off. This probably went out to over 24 publishers and agents before somebody picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear stories about that, people sending 40, 50 submissions before they finally get somebody. So it's not a simple process by any means.
It is so helpful for people to hear that, where you are at the stage now where it's tangible and you have it in your hand and you're able to promote it and share it with the world. But very oftentimes we see that and we're not always recognizing, when you pull the curtain back, that there really is a whole process and a time frame. And you really have to be committed and believe in something so strongly to continue to immerse yourself in that material and then revise it and then have other people review it and give you feedback. And so this is clearly something that you believe so strongly in. So
Yeah.
my question would be, in kind of reflecting back over your career and now you have this finished product, what do you think could change if more people were privy to this approach that you take? How do you see this helping those that are in this role of conducting risk assessments if they have this information and are operating with this in their toolbox?
Um, I'd be lying if I said I thought this was the end all and be all, because there are so many different models out there and so many different approaches. But I think this is a valuable tool that people can have in their toolbox, along with whatever else,
Yeah.
might be in there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think my agent said it best when she started sending this out to publishers. She said, "This is a book that might save lives," and I'd like to think that that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That there are skills that can be garnered from this book. There are approaches that people can incorporate into their practice that I think and I hope will make a difference for folks. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't have written it.
Yeah, and definitely would not have gotten to this stage for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So as a group practice owner and somebody who has obviously provided supervision throughout my career, seen a caseload myself, and now oversee this team, I see so much benefit to being able to provide more questions and opportunities to gather information that can help us make the right choice in that position of being a therapist when you're working with someone who is really struggling. And so I think exactly what you said, if you're not asking the question, very oftentimes someone is not going to be forthcoming with that information. And if we make our decision on how to proceed without really doing some of that deeper dive and getting that context, as you said, we could be missing opportunities to really support someone and help them through it. Because for those of us that have known someone that's gone through that process of potentially being evaluated and being hospitalized, and in all reality, there are very appropriate circumstances for that to happen. And I do think there are opportunities where it can be helpful. But I also know times where it can be really disruptive and it can potentially negatively impact that relationship between therapist and client. And I do think there is some room for managing that in the outpatient therapy space. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I know of situations, having supervised a lot of clinicians, I know of situations, one in particular that actually happened to me that comes to mind as we're talking was I had a young 14-year-old who I met with him and his mother. And this was like 6, 7 sessions in, so this wasn't brand new. And we were talking about issues around self-esteem and self-image, and tears just flowed down his face. And he looked at his mother and said, "I just don't like myself." And then he pulled up his sleeve and he showed me the scratches from earlier in the week. His mother was like, I mean, literally. I never saw him again. She pulled him from treatment. I learned a lot from that. I'd like to say I was still a novice. It was probably about 4 or 5 years into my career, but you never stop learning. You know that as well, I'm sure. You never stop learning. Even now, I still keep learning. But yeah, there are circumstances where you might lose that client, no question. And you got to look back and say, okay, did I do my job? Is what I did appropriate? That's where supervision comes in. That's where discussing these things with your supervisor, can be extremely helpful. But yeah, it's going to happen, and not just around this issue. It could be around any number of different things. Couples therapy. There are so many landmines when it comes to couples work, where you could lose them. And like I say, good supervision, that's the key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I also think even broadening that support network and potentially having a consultation group or,
Sure.
having safe spaces with people that are trained and seeing a similar clientele or addressing similar issues, because there are so many gray area situations and we can use our training and ethical guidelines and we know the law and we know our requirements as a clinician, but to really have a space where you can process some of those scenarios that aren't so clear cut.
Yep. Yep. And one of the things I taught, the last chapter of the book, I do some housekeeping. And originally I wanted to call it Some Final Thoughts. My editor didn't think that was such a good title for the chapter. But one of the things I mentioned in there is that at some point in your career, it's very likely you will lose a client to suicide. And that's happened to me. I know other people that it's happened to. It's almost an inevitability. The longer you work in this field, the better the chances are that that's going to happen. And again, that's where supervision comes in. That's where, perhaps some sort of clinical support group with peers can be helpful. Bottom line, we don't control people's lives as much as we'd like to think we do. We see them for an hour, maybe 2 hours a week, and the rest of the time, we're not there. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important to hear. And having support in times like that is really crucial. This is really difficult work. We're very oftentimes on the front lines supporting people through some of the most difficult times in their life, processing past trauma, going through any number of situations in their day-to-day. And so, yeah, I think statistically, the longer we're doing this, the more people we come across, the more likely it is, if we're in a position like myself as a group practice owner, and you employ several people, and that just increases the level of impact that you can have and the number of clients you serve, but also the types of scenarios like this where you really want to make sure that you're overseeing things properly and making sure that you have really solid systems and processes and a crisis protocol and safety planning and all of those pieces. So There's no question this book is an invaluable resource. I would love to hear about what the process has been like for you now that you are at this stage in the process and starting to promote and share this with other people. What has that been like for you? Because I know trained mental health professionals can really struggle with marketing because it can feel sometimes really misaligned to be promoting ourselves and positioning ourselves as an expert. And I'm sure that's something that you have to do some work on to be in this stage. So I'd love to hear more about how you're navigating that.
And that's been a big learning curve in terms of who does what. And I've learned as a first-time published author, and I've talked to other authors who are a little further along than I, who basically said the same thing. 90% of the marketing, 90% of the book promotion falls on the author. So you really got to get out there. You really got to be willing to promote. I think I said to you in the email that I sent you, when I was doing fundraising, I adhered to two principles. One is be totally shameless. In other words, just be willing to put yourself out there in any way, shape, or form you can, and never miss an opportunity, this being case in point. But yeah, so much of the marketing falls on the hands of the author to get out there, and social media. I've never been on Instagram or any of the other ones. Facebook and LinkedIn, yes, but Instagram, TikTok, I'm there now. I'm posting YouTube videos. I'm always looking for opportunities to in-person interviews. I have one coming up in January with a program that's on Channel 12 in Providence.
Nice.
I've been accepted to present a workshop at the 2006 NASW Symposium in April. So you just got to look for any and all opportunities to get out there and promote. And yeah, that's been a big learning curve as far as whose responsibility is. And if you're an author that wants to get published, know that comes with it. It really does come with it.
Yeah, I think that's so important for people to think about, because as I'm hearing you talk about this process, I can see so many hurdles that, would prevent somebody from getting to the place that you're at right now. And you think that once you actually have the book in your hand, you've reached the finish line. But in all reality, it's just a new phase in the process. And so now it's sharing all of that hard work and your message with as many people as possible. So this definitely requires persistence and stamina and audience building. And so, even just thinking back early on, like you said, people can put this out there and, not necessarily always get the response that they expect. And there's the editor and there's the publisher. And so I think it's important for people to really think about all of the steps in this process and preparing themselves to have realistic expectations and know that when it comes to this point that you need to have some left in the tank to shout from the rooftops and share this with everyone.
Not every book is going to become a New York Times bestseller. The thing about my book is there's a very targeted audience for it. This is not something the average person is going to walk into a bookstore and go, oh, yeah, I think that'd be great bedtime reading for me. It's people in the mental health field. The one thing, though, I want to say is I wrote it in a very plain, I don't want to say plain spoken way, but I tried to stay away from technical jargon so that, the average person could pick it up and learn from it and understand it. And that was a conscious decision on my part to write it in that style. But this is a very targeted audience, no question. So that makes the job even more difficult.
It does, but I also see the other side of that coin where this is something that if you get the attention of the right people could be something that's required of larger organizations, community mental health agencies, larger group practices.
Right.
And so I think it's really about getting that in front of the right people. And that is an added bonus where this could potentially be a requirement for some of us in the field. So my final question to you would be, if any clinician out there, if every clinician out there were listening that is going to be working with a client that may struggle with suicidality at some point in their career, what is the biggest takeaway that you would want them to have from today and be thinking about even after this episode's over?
I think the biggest thing, and I've said this many times to people and to groups that I've done trainings for, suicide is one of the two most preventable causes of death that I know. The other is homicide. What makes it preventable is that suicide entails behavior. In other words, you have to do something in order to commit suicide. Behavior can be prevented, it can be stopped, but you have to know what to look for. You have to know what the warning signs are. You have to know how to intervene, and you have to know what to do and how to say it and how to do it in order to prevent it. And that's the biggest, and that's the hopeful piece for me, is that this is a preventable behavior. In every case, obviously not, but study, read, learn, get as much information as you can, not just from my book, but the hundreds and thousands of articles and books that are out there, seminars, workshops, you name it. Keep learning.
Yeah. Very powerful message. And I love what you had said before. It doesn't matter how seasoned you are or how long you've been in the field. We should always be open to learning and growing.
Two things I just want to mention real quick. AI is becoming more of a presence. There were two cases recently in the last month or so, a young adolescent who was using an AI therapist and an adult woman who was doing the same, who eventually committed suicide. In the case of the young man, the AI, he asked the AI whether he should be telling his mother how he feels, and the AI literally said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So now we're facing more than social media, now we're facing AI.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I just want to mention is the National Suicide Crisis Line number is 988. It used to be an 800 number. Now it's 988. Much simpler, much easier to remember. So keep that in mind. That's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week number.
So helpful. And I will definitely make it easy for people and include the link to the book in the show notes. But I so appreciate all that you've done in this field, the persistence and the effort that you have put in to actually make this book a reality. And I wish you the best of luck in the promotion of it. And I really hope that it lands in the hands of the right people and is able to really enable those of us in our position to support clients even better when they're facing some of the most challenging times. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.